And we're back with Geoghegan. You'll have noticed Geoghegan's almost nonchalant use of the very outside inches of the northern crossing. This is an incredibly difficult section of the course. To drop a wheel off the edge of that that crossing will be history for Geoghegan. It'll put the car out of the race with a big thump. But this doesn't worry Geoghegan at all. We've got unofficial times on them of 1:53.9. This compares with their qualifying times. Oh, there's Geoghegan using a little bit more of the road than he intended to. And you see the way Colin Bond rushed up on him there. Geoghegan had to back off for an instant, and Bond was right with him. Finding that the slower cars are becoming more frequent now. Just comparing this 53.9 time for the leaders with their qualifying laps. Geoghegan lapped in 51.5, Moffat in 51.3, Bond in 51.9, Digby Cooke, who was with us for unfortunately only a few laps, in 51.8. So that at this stage they're conserving anything up to 2 seconds. They're obviously playing for distance. Geoghegan seemed to lock a wheel there under brakes. Very tricky section of the course here. You've got to be turning left and still braking from quite high speed. In fact, Geoghegan there would be putting the brakes on while he's on correcting lock, coming around the side of the lake. Now coming out from Polo. There's a lot of power in a Falcon GTHO, and you can see it demonstrated there. He slips past that Datsun with effortless ease. And a touch of the opposites again, coming out from Ledger. And the Datsun there doing its level best to hang on to Colin Bond, and Colin Bond saying, well, if you don't mind, I'll come through. And you can see the distance that these two have pulled out from the remainder of the leaders of the field. Virtually the full length of pit straight, and probably then some. And coming into the picture after that first lap excursion is Allan Moffat. Moffat at this stage would be 4th or 5th. There's enough race for him to come back into the picture. Should he do this, the first man to know his presence will be John French. Geoghegan quite smooth here. Bond behind him, knowing Colin Bond, head thrown back, looking completely calm as though he's watching television. Long, tight right-hand approach onto the causeway. And a time now for Colin Bond of 1:52.6. I think possibly the pace is quickening because that 1 second extra compared to the previous lap time he had would bring him right behind Geoghegan. Geoghegan assuming would presumably be doing much the same times. There's our leaders across the causeway. John French now in 3rd spot comes through. That's one of the lapped Datsuns. Car number 6, Dave Morrow from the North Coast. And he's a retirement, I'd say, a retirement. Car 31 giving an immaculate halt sign, but it's Geoghegan. There's no question we're going to have a new leader. Geoghegan with his hand out the window. And going straight past him is the new race leader, Colin Bond. Right in frame now. We'll see if he's got a flat tyre. This is the possibility that everyone's been allowing for. Coming into the pit lane. Hurried inspection of the underneath of the car. Out comes the tyre changing gear. Now this will be interesting to watch. You can see they've got a special thing for spinning the 5 wheel nuts off. Off they come as quickly as they can possibly get them off. Well, this is a disaster for Ford. Moffat, a little over exuberant on the first lap, threw away what could have been a lead now that Geoghegan's retired. And instead, it's that wretched Colin Bond driving that car prepared by that wretched old Harry Firth, the old fox, and the young lion. And what a team they make. They've once again embarrassed Ford. The only thing we can be grateful for is that we've now got 2 really tigerish drivers trying to make up for troubles that they've had with their cars. Colin Bond, I think, is going to motor serenely on at the head of the race. He'll keep a weather eye out for John French. He'll keep a weather eye out for Allan Moffat. But they've got to catch him. We've already demonstrated that the Fords have got problems with their rubber. It's acknowledged that Geoghegan, of all the Ford drivers, was hardest on his tyres, and that Moffat, of the three drivers, Moffat, Bond and Geoghegan, that Moffat is the easiest on tyres. Bond somewhere in the middle. But if Bond can last the distance, the question will be, can Allan Moffat? And away goes Geoghegan. He's tried getting this done at your local service station. There's Geoghegan away again in not much more than 30 seconds. He's being held up till I get a clear slot for him to come through, and here's Moffat. The red Avenger in third spot at this stage.
Well, with Geoghegan away, we're in at lap 12, and the leader is car number 36, the Holden Monaro, driven by Colin Bond, followed by the Alfa Romeo number 43, driven by John French. Then car number 32, which is Allan Moffat, the Ford Falcon. Car number 37 is fourth, Digby Cooke driving the Holden Monaro. And car number 39, Bill Tuckey driving another Holden Monaro. Then car number 33, Fred Gibson driving the Ford Falcon. And 44, another Alfa Romeo driven by Peter Brown of the Australian Capital Territory.
Well, we've just had a glimpse of Digby Cooke running astern at this stage of Allan Moffat, getting a little bit sideways in the process. Colin Bond, the leader, is well and truly in the traffic, coming up through the edges here. Here you've got not necessarily to follow the ideal line, but the line that'll give you the quickest run through the slower cars. This can be a hazardous time when slower cars inadvertently get in your way, but the problem doesn't seem to have applied to Bond. And it looks as though he's coming up behind Pete Geoghegan, in fact. Looked like car 31. Just ahead of Bond as they come onto the causeway. That would suggest then that Geoghegan has lost almost an entire lap. We've underestimated his tyre changing time by a full minute. Yes, and it's Geoghegan that's just ahead of Bond as they come up from the causeway towards Polo. Now, what Bond will do here is hard to say, because Geoghegan could just happen to be in the wrong places at the right times and slow Bond down considerably, in fact, quite strategically. On the other hand, if Bond tries to get past Geoghegan, Geoghegan is, I doubt, going to wave him through. This is the motor industry in another form. There's intense competition to win this race between Ford and the General. And well, you can see that Colin Bond isn't actually getting a first-class passage through the traffic there from Geoghegan. Geoghegan is leaving no doors unnecessarily open. And I think Colin Bond here has got an interesting problem in strategy, and probably Big Pete is smiling happily to himself in the way that only Big Pete can, as he watches Colin Bond duck from side to side in his rear-view mirrors. Well, this is much the same as the race was 5 or 6 laps ago, except that Bond is now well, Geoghegan, put it this way, Geoghegan is virtually a lap behind. Bond's problem is not so much Geoghegan, but the pressure from behind from Allan Moffat. Now, he's got to try to reconcile whether he can allow Moffat to come very close to him, or whether he can afford to say, well, Moffat's going to wear out his rubber the same way that Geoghegan did, and I can afford to let him come fairly close, because before the race is over, he too must stop. I think possibly the opportunities will come in traffic. Bond may find an opportunity to either slip past Geoghegan or really get close to him if Geoghegan should be balked. But, you can't underestimate the tactics of Pete Geoghegan. He's a very wily bird. You know, here's where it's happening. Bond's right with him. He's trying to work out where will be the best place to go, and of course so is Pete Geoghegan. And Geoghegan nosing underneath, this is the way to do it. And Bond going around the outside has been out-fumbled for sure. Well, it's not the first time I've been wrong, and Bond pulls that one off with great aplomb, but I think that the margin between the two of them is now slightly in Geoghegan's favour, slightly more so than it was the lap before, and they're now sandwiching one of the Chrysler Valiants. This one, I would say, would be either Nick Bettingham's or Graham Ryan's. It was Graham Ryan's, and Bond has passed Graham Ryan, continues with Pete Geoghegan making the pace in front of him. There's John French. Now, here's an interesting point. I don't think French is losing very much time at all to these two. The inference here would be that Bond is not going as fast as he would like. Geoghegan is tactically being just a little slower than perhaps his, and here's Bond. Yes, it's obvious that Bond has decided Geoghegan has to be got rid of. He's moving to the outside. Geoghegan, of course, has got the inside running at Creek. And here's second place man, John French, the laughing Queenslander. One of the unsung heroes, I think, of Australian motor racing. If this man had started, or had been 10 years younger when he started his motor racing, he'd be an open wheeler star. He's a versatile driver, a very polished, friendly sort of fellow. I first met John French at a hill climb at Inverell in northern New South Wales, and we'd seen this very cheerful chap driving on a dirt hill climb in an almost uncontrollable road racing car. And there was French after the race meeting, cooking steaks for everybody on a huge boiler. And he had natural charm and friendliness, and he's still got it. Our race leader, Colin Bond. He's got problems, has Colin. He's got forwards all round to worry about, and his tyres underneath him to keep him busy. This is a race where, despite the reliability of these cars, the drivers have got to be relatively cautious.
Well, we're now into the 15th lap. We're still watching the leader, Colin Bond, in the Holden Monaro. Second position, car number 43, John French in the Alfa Romeo. Then car number 32, Allan Moffat driving the Ford Falcon GTHO. And then follows Bill Tuckey, car number 39 in a Holden Monaro. Next position is Fred Gibson in a Ford Falcon GT, followed then by Peter Brown of the Australian Capital Territory in another Alfa Romeo 1750 GTV. Then we have one of the smaller cars, car number 22 is a Morris Cooper S, driven by Don Holland, and car number 24, another Morris Cooper S, driven by Jeff Leeds, but they're into lap 15.
At Creek, we can see that Bond is now back in the lead. While we were eulogising John French, Bond sees his opportunity, slipped past, and you can see that he's pulling away from Geoghegan now. He's got to create some insulation here, if he possibly can, from French and from the resurgent Allan Moffat. The whole weight of the Holden dealer team is now resting on Bond's shoulders. Possibly we could suggest that Bond's rally driving, where the need to sustain your effort and your concentration over long sections of unfamiliar road in the dark and when you're very tired, can stand him in good stead here. He's fresh to the drive. He's only going to have to drive 75 miles. He's only driving on tar. It's in the daylight. For Bond, this is probably a relative snack. There's the shape which is now very familiar to all Australians, the Monaro profile, teardrop rear window. And he comes up to pass one of the less Monaros, slipping past it with no trouble at all, largely I think not on power but on the speed from which he came out from Ledger. And you can see him drawing away even further through paddock. It was Bill Warner that he passed in the Monaro 327. Bill Warner's the big Sydney boy from down Cogra way, who made a name for himself driving super modifieds on the speedway, not having quite as much success on the tar. You can see here why the drivers of slower cars have really to watch behind them. The speed with which the leaders are coming past is quite remarkable. You need only have your attention diverted for 4 or 5 seconds, and someone that you just didn't see a moment ago can be right behind you and getting pretty hostile about it. So comparing the style of Colin Bond with that of Pete Geoghegan on the early laps of this race, it does seem that Bond's having an easier drive, making it look a little more relaxed. He's not using all the road the way that Geoghegan does, but I think at this juncture we can say that he's consolidating a fairly useful lead. One hesitates to say that he's got the race sewn up, because so much can happen in a relative long distance race like this. you can see just above Bond's car the crossing, which takes the road race course across the grass of the horse racing track, down the inside around the lakes, and then back up Mount Polo, which is called that because it's a corner of the polo field here at Warwick Farm. And we've just had a really big lose up at no, it's not Digby Cooke, or is it? If it's 37, it is Digby Cooke. And with a fair amount of aplomb, he recovers, leaving behind what I would estimate to be around about $40 worth of rubber smoke, hanging rather heavily in the air. Well, whether Digby Cooke was running into handling troubles or getting himself just a little bit over the limit is hard to say, but 4 or 5 laps ago we saw him pretty sideways on the approach to Homestead, and this time he really did it. Right in front of the grandstands where everybody, all the paying people can see it. He'll probably get a bonus for that. The word spin seems to be rather unfamiliar to Colin Bond. He's nowhere near oversteer at any stage. He's playing it rather cool. All he's got to do is last the distance at this speed. This, in fact, is where the driver is really going to be put to the test. He's got nobody right behind him to pace him. He's got to do his own judgment of speeds. He's still got to keep the car going as quickly up the straights. He's still got to remember to brake just as hard, not to brake too soon, otherwise his lap times will dribble away in tenths of a second here and tenths of a second there. And I think now we're coming up to the rest of the field, 32 maybe. There's John French, there's no question. In 32, then in second place is John French, is Allan Moffat. Same lap as the leader, all 3 cars on 17 laps. In third place, car 43.
Well, they're now into the 19th lap, and here's another call of the race situation. Colin Bond, driving the Holden Monaro, is a clear leader. He's holding about a 10 to 11 second gap over Allan Moffat, driving the Ford Falcon, and in third position is John French, Queensland, driving the Alfa Romeo. Fourth position, car number 39, Holden Monaro, driven by Bill Tuckey, followed by 37, Digby Cooke in a Holden Monaro. Then a Ford Falcon GT, number 33, driven by Fred Gibson. Then number 44, Peter Brown of the Australian Capital Territory in the Alfa Romeo. And then following that Alfa is car number 24, a Morris Cooper S, driven by Jeff Leeds. But the leading car, Colin Bond, holding about an 8-second gap at the moment, with 12 seconds between second and third.
Well, that's a fairly useful gap to have. 8 seconds is a long distance. It's enough to work out a way around any mobile chicane that Bond might come up onto. It's enough for him to even put a wheel off the road, back right off, get it all sorted out and start again, still without him being overtaken by Moffat. If that was a Capri parked on the side of the road, it would be Jim Lang Peach, editor of Wheels magazine, parked on the outside there at Homestead. This is Jim's personal road car. Looks like it might get a bit of attention before he can drive it home tonight. There's Bond. A little bit of opposite block there. Quick flick of the wheel. The time for Bond now, 1:51.8. This is a tenth faster than his practice time yesterday, which suggests that he's not really hanging around at all. He may have got a message from the pits to suggest that the gap to Moffat is too much to be overlooked. Whistling round past Ray Bell on that isolated little flag marshal point at the top of the lake, onto the causeway. I think this will be Moffat coming into camera now. There he is. Time now about 6 seconds astern. Well, this is a turn-up. Moffat appears to be closing the gap. There's enough race, there's unquestionably enough race left. And is that Was that a halt sign from Moffat, or was it just a get out of the way sign for the marshals to give a flag to one of the cars ahead? Well, Moffat's come through again. There's no problem about that. Bond starting to put the pressure on across the western crossing there and approaching Homestead. You can see now he's getting just a bit sideways in quite a few places. Well, there's 3,000 or 4,000 people, if you have time to look at them, along the bankings there in Hume Strait. Bond starting into creek now from wider. This is the line you can take if there's nobody else around that might get underneath you. Makes the corner wider. On the other hand, as you could see, when Geoghegan was being pursued by Bond, Geoghegan makes sure he's on the inside, because this way no one can slip underneath you. And there's Moffat coming into the picture, tail out, inside front wheel, hanging over the beveled curb, pouring it on the way up to the causeway, to the northern crossing, rising and crashing down on the suspension, the causeway. And I think here we get a chance to see one of those little battle scars that touring cars generally acquire sometime during their lives, a slightly crushed guard. Now, Moffat's been dead lucky here, because if that had been crushed in the wrong place, it would have cut his tyre for sure, would have absolutely ruined his chances. Now, since he was passed on the inside by Geoghegan, that is to say on the side we can see now, which is virtually clean, Moffat must have made this mark on some other luckless competitor. It won't be until the race is over, I don't think, that we can get our intelligence system to work to find out who that might have been.
Well, that was at end of lap 24, and it's Bond still leading in car number 36 from between 5 to 6 seconds to Allan Moffat in second position. In third position is car number 43, the Alfa Romeo, driven by John French. Fourth position, car number 37, Digby Cooke in the Holden Monaro. He is followed by car number 39, Bill Tuckey in another Holden Monaro. And then in sixth position, car number 33, Fred Gibson in a Ford Delta Falcon GTO. Seventh position, Peter Brown of the ACT in an Alfa Romeo. And then in seventh position, car number 44, which is one of the... Just can't pick him up for the moment. I think he's one of the Morris Minis. And in eighth position, car number 22, another Morris Cooper S, driven by Don Holland.
Bond there, starting to lap the cars which are in the first 10. Moffat coming into the picture. This is somewhat a more difficult task, because the speed differential here is not as marked. These little minis are not hanging around at all. There's John French, and I think behind him one of the Mazda rotaries. French on his way now down to the causeway. Yes, French peeling off past the big gum tree onto the causeway, and Bond, I think it is, thrusting his way between minis here through Ledger. Disposing of them. That was a rather tense moment for Bond there. If someone does drastically get in his way, this is the opportunity that Moffat's looking for. And Moffat is closing the gap, in fact. Of course, Moffat's still got to catch up with this preoccupied little bunch of tail-enders, and then possibly this will be Bond's opportunity to open the gap. The blue flag being flogged to death there on the straight. You can see the flag marshals on the left of the picture there, and a hand over out of one of the minis waving Moffat through. Now there's Bond coming across the apex of Creek now. The distance down to 4 seconds. He's catching up with one of the Tirana GTRs, and the Tirana waves him through. There's a little bit of loyalty there between makes, I suspect. And there's Moffat once again inside front wheel across that curb and on the final left-hander of the S's. We should have John French along fairly soon. French just into the picture, and that's John French. We saw the tail of the car before, we saw the front of it. and French will be having a ball out there. He's got one of the widest smiles in motor racing, this boy. Look at Alfa, a very nice handling car, underpowered compared to the big American V8s, but on a course like Warwick Farm, able to give a very good account of itself. See how the rear of the car really tucks up in the air as French puts the brakes on. And just sitting there, he's having a nice easy drive, making it look so easy. He's a natural stylist, John French. And Colin Bond, once again past the pits. The car's sounding good. And behind him, not very far behind, a somewhat crisper, harder sound from Allan Moffat. And there's Bond still at it. There's still that little tail hanging as he goes through that unnamed corner towards the towards Homestead, and there a little slip by Bond, obliged to put two wheels on the cement edging on the outside of Homestead. See the rubber marks starting to litter the road there, and Bond blocking an inside front wheel. He's going pretty well, as fast as he could possibly go. He's got a few tenths of a second up his sleeve if it's really necessary, but he's trying to make sure that about a 95% effort will win him the race. Bond picking it up and carrying it across the causeway. And there's Moffat in the picture in very little time at all. This race is winding up to a rather interesting finish because, well, these two fellas are neither of them reluctant to win motor races. And Moffat, of course, has got his first lap indiscretion to make up for. Using a lot of power and hanging the tail well out there as he comes off from the causeway up towards paddock. This is the stage where the driver's really working very hard, and Moffat's got the really ticklish job. He's starting to lay rubber smoke now. I think he's decided, well, he's either got to win or blow in the attempt. This should see us some pretty interesting motoring from Moffat because he's a good peddler, this boy. And we can feel the rising wind here. The wind is whistling round our microphones. It's probably a rather tricky day for fellas in light cars out there. There's Peter Brown in his ochre-coloured Alfa, just briefly in camera, and Bond really pouring it on through Homestead this lap. 11 seconds the gap between second and third, and about 4.1 seconds by hand timing between Bond and Moffat. Well, there's Jim Lang Peach back in the picture again. We can see his black and white LP number plate in his little Ford Capri. He'd be a fair way behind though at this stage. Well, Moffat can't be very far behind at this juncture, but this is the section where probably the Monaro can pull out half a second or so because it's a slightly better handling car. And there's Moffat. You could just see the puff of dust as he climbed across the curb on his way onto the northern crossing. This is the sort of stuff that racing tyres don't really like, as a matter of fact. It's been scuffed up against curbs on their sidewalls. Bond across the causeway and Moffat onto the causeway. Out comes the tail as the power goes on. And across the inside apex as well. That was what lifted him up and bounced him across off the outside of the road on the exit from the corner. Well, here's a fair measure of what's between them. There's Bond just dropping into Ledger now. Long right-hander. Very difficult to gauge exactly where you are in the corner, and Moffat behind him, putting on the power. You can see the white tyre smoke coming out from behind them. About 1, 2, 3 seconds maybe between. And Moffat sounding like a really powerful ski boat. Good crisp V8 noise, and the two of them now hurrying off towards Homestead and down the straight again, which is where the Ford will come into its own. It's probably got about 5 miles an hour on the Monaro. Approximately speaking, the Monaro will be doing about 115, the Falcon around about 120. On the other hand, the disadvantage can be annulled somewhat by the better braking of the Monaro at the end of the straight. But there they both are. These are our protagonists. Bond out of the picture at the bottom, and Moffat across the picture at the top. shuffling the wheel there, making sure he doesn't get too sideways and spend too much time spinning his wheels. Through the middle right-hander. Bond there not really betraying the fact that he's under considerable pressure now. And there's Moffat once more, raising clouds of dirt. I've got a feeling that Moffat could just be unlucky enough to break the car before the end of the race, wear out its rubber. There's very little between them at this stage, and Bond, of course, can be consoled by the fact that he's been conserving his car, relatively speaking, for the whole race so far. This will show us what the scores are. This is the total odds board. First car 36. Moffat there, sideways with a bit of a twitch. He had to back off and snap it straight, coming out from Ledger. Knocks off 2 or 3 miles an hour doing it. Bond now coming up, I think, behind one of the GTR Tiranas. No, it's another Falcon GT. You can see the flags being waved, and this Falcon GT is it's just in the way where he doesn't want it. Into the straight where 2 or 3 miles an hour lost will be 2 or 3 miles an hour lost all the way down the straight, and there's very little between them on speed down here, and the rain starting to spray down. Moffat getting waved through, and you can see the wipers coming on. Moffat's wipers already working, and Moffat now through on the inside into Creek, not very far behind Bond at all. But a rather untidy line there. I think that was Fred Gibson. I think if it was car 33, it was Fred Gibson that we had a brief glimpse of there at Creek. But the race unquestionably headed by these, or the interest in the race headed by the duel for the lead. Bond on the run up that brief straight up to the northern crossing. Moffat behind him, a little more reserved now. Well, you can see that Bond's got every bit of 50 yards as they break for the causeway. Bond a little tighter across the causeway that time. I don't think at this stage that the road is really going to be critically wet, although we can see quite a few cars with windscreen wipers working. Well, so this is rather a hard break for Moffat, because this is where he has to work very hard, where he has to use power as best he can, and the road's becoming slippery. And Bond's got his wipers on. You'll see the articulated blade on the driver's side wiper, which makes it go flat up against the screen pillar and wipes the maximum area. Moffat across the line as well, and there's Bond hanging the tail out as they go through paddock. A very pleasant smell of moist, damp earth and grass here at Warwick Farm. Moffat likewise being fairly conservative with his line. And Bond, yes, for a moment I thought he was going a little slowly, but there's no reservations being made here. Under Dunlop Bridge, I imagine we'll see umbrellas starting to sprout, people run for cover. And Bond, a little twitchy under brakes there. The road obviously not in ideal condition now. And a little bit of slipping and sliding there. A lot of correcting. Look, Bond had his hand off the wheel to grab another fistful for a moment. Of course, the same problems are facing Moffat. The road, I think, getting just pretty greasy now. We haven't had any rain, and there's been 2 days of practicing, official and unofficial, up till now, so that all the oil and rubber that's been ground down into it will start to float up. You get one of the most lubricative emulsions that you could wish to drive on. Bond there all twitchy and snappy and crossed up off the causeway. We'll watch them across the causeway and see what they can do. A bit tricky under brakes as these fairly front-heavy cars get their back wheels almost completely unladen with weight transference. Let's see what Moffat's like. Hip-toed, none of the tail-out performance this time, and I think that the rain might have cooked Moffat's goose. You could just see him then as we cut. They're on their 30th lap. They've got 4 laps left if Moffat's going to do anything about it. Bond coming up now to lap some slower cars through Ledger. they're tucking over, they're keeping out of his way, and he gets a very clear run through, and I think that Moffat is all the time falling back. I regret to say it, and it's a shame to see a good race lost. But I rather think that Bond's got something up his sleeve here. Bridgestones amongst the racing boys are regarded as not having the adhesive capacity of Firestones, which is what Bond is using. They're a relatively hard tyre. They don't squeegee the road quite as well as the softer racing rubber.
Well, with the race drawing to an end, there's not a great deal of change in the positions other than the leading two. As we've been watching for the last 20 minutes or so, Colin Bond in car number 36 is leading, and at the end of the last lap, he was then ahead of Allan Moffat in car number 32. John French, car number 43, is in third position, followed then by Digby Cooke in car number 37. Car number 39, Bill Tuckey. Then follows car number 33, Fred Gibson in a Ford Falcon. Car number 22, which was a Morris Cooper S driven by Don Holland. And then car number 24, another Morris Cooper S driven by Jeff Leeds.
Well, Bond is still working for it. You can see that the Monaro is not completely happy. For example, at the northern crossing. And coming out from Creek, likewise, he's had to be very delicate with his throttle work. Coming up now to lap one of the slower Monaros, number 42. His number is not immediately available to us. And Bond, well, he's a lot of sideways there at Polo, a lot of correcting lock, and you can see the car rise and drop down on suspension again as Bond finally gets it straight. This is the sort of brake that Moffat could have used 5 laps ago. Wouldn't be surprised, in fact, if Moffat's still in the same trouble. But Bond's been chasing this slow Monaro, which is a lap slower at least, for 4 corners now, and hasn't managed to get through. Perhaps this is his chance, but they've got to be so terribly careful at this stage. The race could be lost by one inadvertent spin or somebody else's spin at this stage. I think the rain is easing off now, but the track will take quite some time to dry. It'll still be pretty slippery. There's Bob Edgerton's Renault R10 moving over to the right-hand side as Bond goes past a considerable margin of surplus speed there. Now at the end of the straight, being fairly careful not to lock a wheel too hard. The road shining under the car, and watch this for wheel spin and sideways stuff. Well, he's right with it. He's right with it. The lap before, he was busy for a while. But whereas before, we used to be able to see Moffat almost a shadow over Bond's head. Now he's dropping back, and Bond's got the remaining few laps to account for. The distance spread now to 12 seconds. There's very little that Moffat can do to recover now, apart from hope for bad luck for Bond. One of the Valiants coming across the northern crossing there, driven not very hard. Sponsored by one of the Sydney Chrysler dealers. And that's Moffat. You barely recognise him now from his driving in the last few laps before the rain began. Through the rear windows there you can see the outline of the 1.5-inch tubular steel roll cage which is inside the car. And I think Moffat's decided that second place for sure is better than first place maybe. Meantime, Bond continues. Still with his wipers working, so there must be a bit of water out there. An immaculate hold sign from one of the Tiranas. And the checkered flag comes out for Colin Bond, and he's won. Well, I think there'll be jubilation in Gladesville instead today. And there's Digby Cooke, parked on the side of the road. Looks like some of his Bathurst bad luck has returned.
The official placings were first car number 36, the Holden Monaro GTS 350, driven by Colin Bond. Second, car number 32, the Ford Falcon GTHO, driven by Allan Moffat. And third, car number 43, the Alfa Romeo 1750 GTV, driven by John French.